On this episode of Estate and CX, I've got Tracey Dumont from Harris Wood and her 26 years in being in the letting industry, starting from being a lettings negotiator in Brighton, all the way to actually open up Harris Wood 8 years ago. We cover culture, kindness, accountability. So this is a really good episode and I hope you enjoy it.
Estate and CX, the UK's #1 estate agency podcast discussing the future of estate agency, entrepreneurship and business, with hosts Mark Burgess and Rob Brady.
Tracey, welcome to the show.
Hello, welcome.
So anyone listening out there or anyone watching, Tracey, over to you. So what arrives you to be an agency today? How long ago is this?
27 years.
27 years.
I don't recall
Wow.
a grandmother of lettings. And it was really funny. I was living in Brighton, and one of my friends was an area manager for Countrywide at the time, and another couple of friends worked for her. And I just wanted a company car. So if I went to work for her, I would get a company car. So that's what I did. I was interviewed and they offered me the role of property manager or negotiator, and property management did not appeal to me.
Yeah.
And so I just became a negotiator, and I worked in Horsham.
Yeah.
The first month they had their worst month on record, no joke. So that was good for me. But I just really enjoyed it, and I think I love the fact that I got to go to work every day, but I wasn't sat in an office.
Yeah.
It was such a novelty that I could go out and do viewings, but I could listen to the radio as I was doing that. And I think, and still today, no day is the same. And the days just go so quickly, literally blink and you miss it.
Yeah.
And 27 years later, it's still like that. And I still, don't know everything about the industry. There's still so much I have to learn. And I think, that was the thing for me. But yeah, it was, my first day was, I want to say the 23rd of December, I think it was.
No, amazing, remember that.
I know.
It's a couple of days before Christmas. It's a bit easier, isn't it?
Well, my niece was born on that day, so that's how I remember the years as well. Although I did have to ask her how old she was this year to remember how long I've been in agency. But I remember my second day was the Countrywide Christmas party, and I was sat in between two of the directors, like this, green person sat there, thinking, "Oh my god!" But yeah, that was in Brighton, all around that area for quite a few years then.
And then 27 years later,
yeah, here I am.
What's your position and where you're from?
So I live in Colchester. I live in Colchester now, and I am one of the owners of Harris Wood Lettings in Essex. We've got two lettings offices, one in Colchester and one in Whittam. We've been running for 8 years now. 8 years of December just gone, and it's a really, really great business. I'm so proud of it. It's
a phenomenal business.
Yeah, we've done really, really well. And I think I'm getting better, but I'm not always very good at just sitting there and going, "Wow, look what we've done." And I think in lettings it's such a slow start. People that have ever set up their own office, it's a much slower start than you realise and that anyone else realises. But when you get that momentum and it really starts to build, and all of a sudden, you've got 100 properties, 200 properties, 200, 400 properties, and all of a sudden it's big business, it's a valuable business, and and I think, I'm really proud of it. But that I think as I've, become my own boss and the business has grown, I've just become more ambitious. I've just, wanted to do more. I've wanted to take on more people and, help more people. And, I think the reason that we did it, that's never changed, So I just think I still love it. I probably love it more than I ever did, to be honest with you. I'm still so hungry and passionate, just to do more.
Okay, so 8 years of that.
Yeah.
27 years. So, first job, how long were you there for?
I was at Countrywide for, I want to say, about 8 years. So I haven't had loads of jobs.
Yeah.
I was there for about 8 years. And I loved it. They were really, really good to me. I worked with really great people. I worked in Horsham and then Brighton. And then I went to Southsea. That was weird because I'd never done any form of management, like where I came from, very, very working class. I never pictured myself in that role. And I don't know what made me do it, but there was a vacancy that came up for the Southsea office to be a lettings manager. And I applied, and it was 50 miles away from Brighton. And I literally don't know why I did it, but I thought I'm going to apply for that. I was a senior neg at the time, never managed people. And I got the job amazingly. And for 3 months, I commuted every day from Brighton to Southsea. And then I moved there. And with it, I met my best friend there. She was working the sales office. and she came strutting into the office, and I just thought, I want her to be my friend, and I made her my friend. And here we are all these years later. But I literally, moved there, and I knew no one there. I'd never been to the place, let alone worked there.
That's so bold.
Yeah, I know. And I've done it a few times now, to be fair. And I think I just like the idea of the kind of reinvention. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I absolutely, I loved it. And it became a really good business. And I was there for probably 18 months, 2 years. And then I came back to Brighton, because when I left Brighton, I was senior neg, and I came back, and then, I was manager, and it was a really big office. So it was a really big task. And at the time, where I'd worked in Southsea, we just had lettings in the office. There was no property management. And then in Brighton, we had property management, and it was a standalone branch, lettings, which was quite rare back in those days anyway. But a really, really big branch. And that was fantastic. I loved it. It was really hard work, but it went, from, an office of myself, a negotiator, and a part-time admin, to 7-8 people.
And being a neg, going out, like you said, getting the radio on, driving to doing a viewing, chatting to people, coming back, putting the radio on, coming back. To then driving 50 miles. I used to do the Dartford crossing commute, so I know, like, when you drive those like long miles, but to then managing people, did it come naturally to you?
Probably not, actually. I definitely made some mistakes. I know I did. And there were times when I was a lot sharper than I should have been. I wasn't always very good at managing my temper, how I might speak to someone. And I look back at that time, even thinking about it, it makes me really, really uncomfortable, because I know there were some times when I was probably, a bit of a cow, to be fair. But, you're kind of learning, aren't you? And not that makes it right, but, I think people have seen, I spoke to someone else about this the other day, in our industry, the career path is training neg, senior neg, assistant manager, if there is, and then manager. And that, it seems to be irrelevant whether or not you're suitable for that role. That is a career path.
Yeah.
And just because you're a really good senior neg or a really good assistant manager, it doesn't mean that you'll make a really good manager. And I think people just don't think about that. That's just a career path. I want to be a manager. And I think, I was lucky. I've always worked with really good people around. I've always had really good people around me. So I've had really good guidance. And I've always, been able to, put my hand up and ask for help. So I definitely, made some, mistakes. I'm sure I made some people cry at times, which is horrible to think about that. But I'm sure that would have happened. But I think as I've got older, I've become a much better manager, because I understand myself more.
Yeah, because I think I've had people that you put in senior positions, and they've got two options. They're either quite assertive, because I need to dominate to show, my validation.
Yeah.
Control things, or you might have people who keep saying to them, like, stop trying to be their friend.
Yeah.
And just wondering why you get upset because you're just trying to be nice to them.
Yeah, and that's hard,
because you don't want conflict.
Yeah, and I was definitely, the first one for quite a long time. And I think also that does become, being a woman.
Yeah.
Because, I think back in my day, we're talking 20 odd years ago now, which is a long time ago, you kind of felt like you had to be a bit of a ball breaker, and to be a successful, woman in business, you've got to be tough, you've got to be a bit of a bitch, and you've got to be all of those things. And that I wasn't naturally like that, to be fair. That's not me at my core.
The persona you had to put on.
Yeah, and I think I did become that person. I was very, different at times in work and outside of work.
Yeah.
But and I think that was completely expected and accepted. Being a woman in business can be tougher, and I think I was, obviously, a lot younger then as well. So people, wouldn't expect, their manager to be a woman or, to be in charge. And that could be quite difficult. But I definitely, when I look back, I definitely felt that I had to be tougher, and have a louder voice at times because I was a woman, which actually that's not the case anymore. Being softer and being vulnerable, and being kind is actually, that is the, that is, what you want your MVP to be, right? You want them to be well-rounded. You want them to be, a nice person, whereas back in the day, being nice was like, oh, that's a bit icky. If someone said you were nice, it was like, oh, who wants to be nice? It was kind of frowned upon, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it's very much changed now. But yeah, I definitely was that in the beginning, and then I think I found that then having to have difficult conversations, I found really difficult, because then I'd be really nice.
Yeah.
And then no one's winning. I had a real
and everyone then gets confused, like,
yeah, where were the boundaries?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know. But I'll never forget a colleague of mine called Vic Ashgandhi. He was fantastic. He worked at Heart, and and he was amazing. We were on a training course together, and he was really good at kind of having the straight conversations with people. And I said to him, but how do you do that? And he said, well, you're just candid. And I didn't know what candid meant. And he said, you're just telling someone the truth. And that really stuck with me. And that was probably about over 20 years ago now, that conversation. And I remember it so clearly. And that was a real turning point for how I manage people. You know, I don't always get it right, of course not. But, you know, the way I view it now is if I'm having to have a difficult conversation with you and I'm being candid, I'm not saying I don't care about you. I'm just saying I don't like that behaviour. And I care about you enough to have a straight conversation with you, you know. I always want people to know, you know, where they stand, you know, whether that's friends, family member, whatever. So having difficult conversations is actually the easiest way to do it, right? But it's not easy to get to that. It's such a, you know, it's hard to get your head around that. But yeah, I'm a bit of a sponge, you know. I remember, you know, something that someone might have said, you know, 20 odd years ago, or, you know, the other day. And I kind of piece all these bits together and think, oh, hang on, is that going to work for me? But I'll never forget that from Bikash. That was a turning point.
And so you were there for 8 years, yeah?
About 8 years, yeah.
And then what led you to decide I'm done with this corporate machine?
No, so I had a couple of moves then. So after moving to Brighton, I moved back to Brighton. I then had another move. So I worked in Worthing for a couple of years, and then, you know, again, I just wanted a complete change, and I moved to Bristol for Countrywide. I hadn't, you know, I'd never been there.
Yeah.
And I went to work there. That was really good for me, actually, you know, because again, I knew no one. I'd never been there, you know, knew nothing about it. And it was really tough. But it was also really, really good for me, you know, as well, you know, because again, completely out of my comfort zone. But then my mum and dad, you know, were getting a little bit older. They lived in Essex. And I just started, every time I, you know, went home and come back again, it was a 4 or 5 hour round trip.
My uncle lives in Thornbury outside Bristol.
And if it's a crap journey, you're screwed. And I just thought, if anything happens to them, I just can't get there quick enough. So that was a bit of a worry. So I thought, okay, I need to, you know, I didn't want to live where they were living, but I wanted to live close enough. And one of my old directors, Stephen Nation, he was working at Heart at the time. So I emailed him and said, if anything ever comes up, please let me know. And there just happened to be a job available in Colchester. I've been really, I don't want to say lucky, but, you know, I've had quite serendipitous moments throughout my career where I'll reach out to someone at the right time. And that was one of those. So I managed, you know, to get that job, and I moved to Heart, and I was there for about nine and a half years.
Wow.
You know, and again, you know, I had really great times there. They were really good to me. Without Heart, I wouldn't be, you know, where I am today.
And did you enter a similar sort of role?
I was manager there. Manager there,
yeah.
you know, and in my mind, you know, I'd made it. I got a company car that was a BMW, and I was like,
was it white?
no, I didn't have a white one. No, with the stilettos. No, just I think mine was a blue one actually. But I felt like I'd made it. I had a BMW. I was balling. So, but then I had, you know, and I was quite happy, you know, at that point, you know, become manager. You know, that was it for me. But then we had Andrew Bain come in, who was the managing director then, and my area manager Darren Barney, and they, you know, kind of encouraged / you know, pushed me, you know, to kind of want a bit more really, and then I became senior manager. I was then put forward for the area manager program, become area director. You know, I mean, all of this over a long period of time. And there were some really uncomfortable things. I'd have to do presentations, which is not natural to me at all. But they really pushed me. They saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself. And it was, you know, and I loved it. It was really, really hard work. But I loved it. I was, you know, looked after there, and I had some really great times. But then I left there and I went to work at Connell's for a year and a half. That was an interesting thing because I took over an area that hadn't been doing as well. And I was there for about 18 months. And then I just happened to be out one night in Colchester in a place called The Cube. I hadn't been there for years. And I bumped into Shane Harris from Harrison Wood. And again, a serendipitous moment. He hadn't been out in years. He had a family, and he hadn't been to that bar in years, and I hadn't been to that bar in years. And we just bumped into each other. And I just said to him, you know, congratulations. Him and Mark had announced that they were going to set up, you know, Harrison Wood Estate Agency. And he said, I want to talk to you. And I said, okay, you know, what about? And he said, I want you to set up lettings for us. And I was like, oh, okay. I'd never, ever thought about working for myself. That was, you know, completely out of my wheelhouse. And I was like, okay, I'll go and meet him because I love Shane. You know, I'll go and meet him, you know, see what he's got to say, you know, but I won't do it. Absolutely won't do it. Had this meeting with him and Mark, and I remember driving out there and going, I can't not do this. And I rang my niece, and she was like, how did it go? I said, well, I'm in trouble. She said, why? I said, because I can't not do this. Because if I don't do it, someone else will do it. And I will live with that regret. Yeah, I'm not someone who has regret at all, you know. But the thought that I'd be sitting back, in my corporate job and someone would have taken my opportunity, I just couldn't. So 2 weeks later, I was like, yeah, I'm in. And at that point, they weren't going to be doing lettings for a couple of years. And they were like, right, okay, let's do it then. So behind the scenes, I was setting, everything up, the bank accounts, everything, making us ALA. And I'd never done anything like that in my life. I don't know how I did it. If someone said, how do you set up a business? I couldn't tell you, but I just, kind of learn as I went. Yeah. And it was really weird because I'm one of these people, I might struggle, what to buy for lunch or what to have for dinner. But the big decisions I find really easy to make. The really big ones, I make them and then that's it. And I made that decision 9 years ago and I haven't once thought, is it going to work? Or, there's never once been a minute of doubt. I've never, never thought that I wasn't going to succeed. I just knew. It was really strange. And yeah, we then opened up on the 1st of December.
And what did it feel like going from like maybe your daily, first thing is, what did you learn for that the heart area directorship program you went through, going from a lettings manager to then running an area, then going to work for another corporate low performing area, and trying to work with the people there, to then coming out of that and having no one to manage, like how did that? What did you think? Okay, what I like. What did you probably take from those years in that you thought, okay, right, I want to work. I want to use these. Was there anything that you felt would have gold?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was when you're in an area role, you're not really in control of an awful lot. Yeah. If you work for someone, then you're not in control of an awful lot. You think you are, in my view, but but actually you're not. I mean, I go to see my staff, all the offices, and they'd be unhappy about stuff. But in reality, I couldn't facilitate any change at all. Yeah. I was essentially, a go-between.
Mediator.
Yeah, and that was really heavy for me. I remember, I won't say, which one, but every single month on payday, staff salaries would be wrong. Every single payday. I would dread payday, because I knew my staff would call and they would have been paid incorrectly. And then, I tried to sort it and they'd, sometimes it would be, no, they've got to wait till next month. I'm just like, you can't treat people like that. Yeah. I hated that. We weren't always, providing a good service, yet we wanted the high figures, the high fees. And I kind of, when I look back, I felt that I was becoming someone that was always about deals, instructions. It wasn't about, my people or the service. And I didn't like who I was becoming. There was a lot of good, working for corporates, the structure is fantastic. And I've taken a lot of that with me. The career path is fantastic, and that's something that I need to work on in a smaller business. But the thing that was a big thing for me was it really is a numbers game. And not for the right reasons. I don't care what anyone says. Yeah. It is, and I've worked at 3 of the bigger ones. I can say that from a place of authority. It is like that.
Do you think that, you said like you did little rebirths here and now?
Yeah.
Was it almost like a cleansing of trying to find the actual core of who you were?
It probably was actually, because I think when you're area as well, you're not really in lettings. I could have been area really for any, for anywhere. I mean, I was one of those people that when I was area manager, if my staff were off sick, I would go in and run a branch. I mean, I was a unicorn in that respect because no one else, would do that. And I would be like, well, of course you should do that. How else am I offering any kind of support? But in the main, I could have been an area manager for a crisp company, really, because you're not really in the day-to-day running of it. And I actually really loved lettings. I really loved that connection of it. So I really missed that actually. But when I opened up Harrison Wood, it was a complete 180, so there I, was in the background. And I had to then start with just me. I had a laptop, I had a mobile phone. I didn't have a desk. I didn't have, a phone. I had nowhere to sit. I had nothing at all. It was just me. And I'd never done a cold start before either. So that was completely new. I mean, I went into it really boldly, really, probably without, not an awful lot of clue, but just to go, right, I'm just going to do it. So that was quite testing. And there were times when I thought, I'm not sure, how am I doing this? But then something I did, when Harrison Wood launched me on their Facebook page, Shane wrote this really wonderful write-up about me, and he called me the Lionel Messi of the lettings world. And there was one day where I was thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? So I went back and read that, and I reminded, that's who you are. Because you can forget. It's very isolating at first because it was just me, and I was going out, door knocking, trying all different things. I had to have a complete mindset, change most days. And then I had to remind myself who I actually was.
Mm.
Because I think in sales, especially, when you're door knocking, it's all, how many numbers did you get? How many instructions, did you get? Well, that's not realistic, is it?
No.
How many times, have you ever gone out door knocking and come back with 4 landlord numbers and 3 instructions? It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So you have to have a complete mindset change on managing your own expectations on what really you want to gauge.
Mm.
And that mindset change I had, I actually have today, and with my guys, the big thing for me is all I can control is, in that moment when I was going at door knocking, all I could control is how many doors I knocked, how many people I'd spoken to, and how much information I would gather. So I target them myself. I'm going to gather 5 bits of new information today. And that might be that there's 5 new walls, or I've spoken to a neighbour. I know that property is now vacant. So that was a win. There's 2 more bits of new information there. So I then started to get my wins in different ways. So when you then feel like you're winning, however small that might seem, you're winning every day, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking, I haven't spoken to any landlords, that's a loss. No, it's not.
It's a lot, obviously, like harder growing that, because it's not like you're knocking on a door that's got someone in it
It's rare.
who's going to sell their home.
Yeah.
Lettings is like, most of the time you're knocking on an empty door.
Yeah.
Or potentially tenants there to try and see if you can source information out.
Yeah.
And it can be quite a very draining resource of your time and energy just to try and get that going.
Yeah.
So like, what was the milestone of saying, like, hitting your first 50 properties?
I think,
and how did that feel?
I think, to be fair, I think so. We opened in the 1st of December, and I think a milestone for me was we by the end of March that month, the income that we generated covered our costs.
Wow.
And that was in about 3 or 4 months.
Amazing.
So that, from that month onwards, we've always done that. So I think, I can't remember the first 50, I must admit. But I do remember
that moment, though, there's a great. Actually, just rephrase it. What's the magical moments we were discussing?
That was a magical moment for me. Another one was because our approach, was different. So instead of you sending out like a generic letter, call me or whatever, I would, and I've got terrible handwriting, but I would do a handwritten note, handwritten letter on Harrison Wood headed paper. And I thought of small things like, when you put your business card, I bought rose gold paper clips. And I don't know why, but it's just, I thought, let's just stand out in different ways. And we still do that now. When my, guys do their business generating, we put rose gold paper clips on there because it just stands out a little bit more. It makes it look a bit nicer. We try to make it about us when we write anything. It's in our language. It's not in the generic stuff. It's as if I'm speaking to that person. And that kind of the handwritten letters really helped.
Yeah, I mean, like, we had, like, Kel had a flat that we had empty for a bit of time, we're selling it, and then we put up for let, and then you get the letters come through.
How do you stand out?
And like, you open them up, it's like bills. You open them up, and
they all look exactly the same.
Like, that's even from the same company. That letter sourcing company they come from.
Yeah.
Or you've got this random estate agent I've never fucking heard of.
Yeah.
From an area, just chucking you, thinking like,
yeah.
Local to you,
I don't know who you are, but so that's what I did a lot of. And I was really fortunate actually, because a lot of neighbours, I'd have good conversations with neighbours, and there was one that really stands out, and we still got the property today, 8 years later. I spoke to the neighbour, and she happened to know the owner because his mum and dad lived there. So she called him, and she got him to call me. So I got the instruction that way.
Amazing.
There was another one where it was there were 3 flats above a chip shop. So we called the chip shop, and they passed the details across. There were 3 flats, and we still got them today. And there were 3 flats in Colchester High Street above a bedroom store. So Connor went in and spoke to them. He actually said, "Oh, my aunt's looking for a flat. So she passed the details across. And because we were a new independent, the company loved that, as well. And I think because when we were going out, because from 1st of December, it was just me, and then on the 1st of February, Connor joined. So we did most of our appointments together, and they were meeting me, as a business owner, and they were, meeting Connor, who, whilst he, is not the business owner, he loves it as much, it's as important to him. So they could see how much we loved it and how much it meant to us, and I think people really, really love that, so
And also, like, to chatting to the neighbours, and if the neighbour actually likes you,
you're
they're
into
more
a winner,
likely
aren't
to
you?
go. They're going like,
Yeah.
I'd rather her trying to find a tenant than
Yeah.
the agent I'm probably dealing with, because it's
Yeah.
obviously in their vested interest, isn't it?
But that neighbour, we rent her daughter's properties out even today,
Amazing.
So, when we did a community thing recently where that neighbour's daughter nominated her mum, because her mum's a foster carer, so they won a community prize for us. So it just comes full circle. But and I think it's a cliche, but it really does matter to me. I really do care about the people that we come into contact with, and we don't do things just to put our name out there. We do things because actually we want to do nice things for people, and be part of the community. And I think having our name out there, and me getting out there, in the beginning, like I did, people love the thought of helping me out. And I think that was a really big part of it for us.
And then so 8 years.
Yeah.
What's the size of the portfolio now?
It's around 500 now.
500, yeah.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's difficult to gauge for me, because I'm one of those people where I'm always, I just want more, 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 more. But then I'll have conversations, with other agents. I spoke to an agent last year. They've been running for 17 years and they had 19 properties. So then I'm like, oh, okay, we've done all right then, actually, with 2 offices.
Yeah.
So,
And what was it, so the timeline for over the 8 years? So when did the second office come in?
that was on the first day of the second national lockdown.
Fucking hell.
Yeah. I remember we opened
yeah.
it and it was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's open, now it's closed.
Now it's closed, yeah. So we were still able to work, though.
Actually, yeah.
Yeah, estate agents were still able to work. I mean, during the first lockdown, we didn't furlough anyone. There was only 4 of us then anyway, but we didn't furlough anyone. And because of our infrastructure, because we're a smaller company, we could, we had really great technology in place anyway, but we were already doing virtual tours before them. So we continued trading. We took all of our computers home, so we could just plug in at home. We had soft phone features on our mobiles. We did internet bank transfers anyway. So our infrastructure meant that we still carried on trading.
Yeah.
And we got so busy but when we came out of there, I had to employ someone else.
Yeah.
So that was a real turning point for us. And we were only closed for 2 months anyway. So, but yeah, second lockdown happened. We'd opened on that day, and it was like, well, we're just gonna do our best. That year was quite difficult because I was still kind of overseeing a lot of Colchester, but running Whittam as well. But then by the start of year 2, we then brought in a manager, Luke, who is just, it's just come on leaps and bounds. It's crazy how much that that office has grown, and we've just literally taken on our 4th person there. Started yesterday.
Amazing.
So yeah, that's just been extraordinary.
You've got a team of
in total for lettings. So we've got 4 in Whittam and we've got 8 in Colchester. And we're just about to take another person, so that'll be 9.
13.
Yeah.
Lucky 13.
Yeah, exactly. Very lucky 13. So yeah, we've got a lady starting on the 1st of February as well. So.
And for any of the podcast listeners out there, Tracey and I have got a nice relationship because we've sort of been working with each other for the last sort of year or so. And I've always been impressed with the little things you've talked about. You do for Christmas, and we've had Shane and Mark on here, so it's not just you doing it your side and they're randomly doing sales, so it's a whole company that you guys have operated under. So, and even before I even met any of you, I looked at your socials and there you do. I was like, I can't fucking wait to work for this company. They are. If I was back in agency, I would be doing the 50-mile commute and going working up there and saying to Kel,
you still can.
Yeah, going to Kel, look, I don't know what it is. I've got this hunch.
Drawn,
So recruiting and finding people and caring for people and nurturing people is so fucking hard. Or it's seen as so hard in this industry. Trying to find the talent. You said Luke got his guy on in there. The first, what was the first chap you took on? Connor, yeah?
Yeah.
You talk about Connor all the time,
Yeah.
and he's 8 years later with you,
Yeah.
still now, and you talk about him in such a way that it's not like, "I'm the boss, these are the guys that work for me," no different than what you felt probably in the corporate days of just being cogs.
Yeah.
Like, how 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 was the recruitment process going from 1 to the 13th now?
So I think with Connor, so I've known Connor for when I was at Heart, he worked with me there. He was a training egg for me there, and then he came to Connell's,
Let me
and then
guess,
here.
he was one of those people, I've had those that you know that they're fucking gold,
Yeah,
and you're like, "Ah,
yeah.
you need to come with me."
Yeah, he was that. And it was funny actually. He won't mind me saying this because we tell everyone this. He worked at head office for Heart and he came down because the property visits were out of control, as you would imagine. So he come, down to go through how we sorted them out. And he said to me, "Oh, if you ever get, a job in branch, let me know." So someone resigned and I thought, Connor.
Yeah.
So I left him a message and he called me back the next morning and I think he was 19. He's 32 this year. He was 19 and he said, "I'm so sorry I didn't call you back yesterday. I was having dinner with my nan last night." And I thought, if your 19-year-old boy is having dinner with his nan, then he's I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Because, for me, I kind of think I look at it, if you're close with your family and if you're a young person and you're making time for your grandparents, you are a good, kind person.
Mm,
And if you're a good, kind person, then I can do the rest, right?
yeah.
That was my view. So he came in for an interview, and when I tell you, it was the worst interview I've ever had. We laugh about it now. He couldn't look at me. He was physically shaking. I had literally had to abandon the interview, and I was like, fantastic, because how the recruitment process was at Heart, it was quite prescribed. You had to fill out all these forms, etc. And then if the manager liked him, then I had to get my director to like him. Otherwise, it was a no-go. And it was honestly awful, this interview, but I just knew, in my gut, I knew. So I said to his line manager at the time, because he worked in a different department, and I said, you've got to help him because I can't help him anymore from here. If he's not good with them, then he's not getting in. And I want to recruit him. So please, please help him. This is what he needs help on. So she did. And he got through and I employed him. But he was, he was just a young lad, but there was just something about him. And I think I've seen him grow up, from boy to man. And even from him joining Harrison Wood, he's a completely different person,
Yeah.
And with Luke had worked, we hadn't worked together, but he'd worked at Heart, years ago as well. And he applied for a different role. We were looking for a listing, a lister at the time in Colchester. And he applied for that because he just really wanted to work for us. And I said to him, that role's not for you because you need to be a manager. And that role, you'd have to work for someone. And that role is not for you. Just bear with me. And then I knew I was going to recruit for Whittam.
So, how do you know that he was suitable for what did you see in him?
He'd already been a manager,
Yeah.
and in a different company, but he was just a really kind person, funny, just really a nice kind of gentle way about him. You don't get me wrong, he's tough as well, but I don't know, kindness for me is the winner.
Mm.
If I think that you're someone who's going to be really kind, then then I'm sold on that, to be fair.
Mm.
And really, Connor and Luke are good cop and I'm bad cop. That won't surprise you, but I just saw something in him, and I just thought, and he really wanted an opportunity where he could make it his own. And Whittam, although it'd been open for a year, it needed someone who wanted that. And it was just him that first year, and he grafted so hard. And our view was like, right, we'll get someone at the end of the year. And he'd done such a great job on his own that we brought someone in earlier, and that was Daisy, who is an absolute dream. I mean, she came in as an apprentice. She's now a senior neg. She's amazing. But yeah, there was just something in Luke. And, what makes me really proud, is if I'm on holiday, then Connor and Luke work really well together. I don't even know what conversations, they're having.
Yeah.
But, there was a scenario while I was away where Connor was really busy. But for some integration, someone needed to do something for him. And even without asking him, Luke just messaged him and said, "I've done that for you, mate." And I'm just like, my work here is done. These two are looking out for each other without me having to ask them to.
Mm.
They're just such a really good team, together. And they're different, but also very similar in their outlooks. And I think, I just need people that are going to be really kind, because if they're kind to their people, and they are, then they're going to be kind to our clients and to the tenants. And that's really, I think a lot of our successes we really do focus on looking, being kind to people. And
And,
I know it sounds like a cliche, but
no, but that's completely different to 19% of the industry,
exactly.
if not 99% of the industry.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to the letting side, because I get that side to it, because you have to be more emotionally invested within the lettings process,
Yeah,
the
it's a long
landlord
term
process,
as
the
well,
tenant
isn't it?
process, because
Yeah.
you can't just put anyone in there, fucking wind them up, because what you can't kick them out.
Yeah.
So you gotta create a great relationship, and you
Yeah.
can only create a great relationship if there is kindness involved within that.
Yeah.
Okay, so 13 members of staff, 2 offices.
Yeah.
So what would you say is what's been your main learnings in those 8 years?
So when I was running Witham, I'd say that was probably about in the August, September. Colchester was, paying for Colchester and Witham. And I'm always someone, is very mindful, of what money's coming in, what money's going out, because I've got people to pay, etc. And there was probably about a month period where paying for 2 branches, I had a corporation tax bill come in, and I was worried I couldn't pay staff. I mean, I could, when I look back, I could, but it kept me awake. Was having sleepless nights, and it was affecting my judgment in terms of fees and business. And I remember it being really hard on Connor and Jack at the time, and saying, "You got to put fees up. You got to do this. You got to do that." And I'd done a 180 on stuff, and I wasn't acting, with any kind of control. I was panicking, and I knew I was panicking, and I knew that I was acting a bit irrationally. But it came from I was worried, so I spoke to HMRC, sorted that out, took out a personal loan, put that into the business, and I've never worried about it since. But that moment in time, it was the only time in the business where I've worried about money and worried about, oh my God, can I pay staff? Can I do this? Can I do that? And I've truly never worried about it since. But that was one of the hardest parts for me, I think, that fear. But then I think if you're worrying about the money, then I'm not worrying about the business. Whereas now I focus on the output, and I say this to my guys all the time. All you can control is what you do. We can't control anything else. But if we control what we do and we focus on what we do and we all stay in our lane, whatever that looks like, then the byproduct of that will be business will come. You might have the month up and down, but business will come if you focus on output in a really, really good way. So that was the biggest thing for me. That was really scary.
And I know obviously a lot that we've been discussing. So where do I want to go next with this? Because for listeners out there as well, because I think the team you've got, right? And you told me you've got 500 properties.
Yeah.
How many people manage that portfolio?
So we have one property manager for Colchester.
One property manager.
Yeah. At the moment, she doesn't do deposits, but it's the only thing she doesn't do. And we have an apprentice property manager that started for Witham yesterday. So Rachel is our property management queen in Colchester, and so she probably manages about 350 properties. Yeah.
How?
I think
because remember we had that conversation. We were in Accelerate program. We had a brief discussion about it.
Yeah.
And they were talking about like when does the next when do we need to? How much does your? And you were like 350.
Yeah, and they looked at me like I was mad.
And we all looked. I was like, fucking hell,
he's lying.
You're lying. And you're like, no, that's it.
Yeah.
How?
So I think we don't have systems in for system place. Like we don't do something just because everything else has everything has intention. I think it's all pretty streamlined. We have got really good tenants and we've got really good landlords.
Yeah.
We've got really good contractors. And the thing that we've always focused on is making sure we look after landlords, tenants and contractors. Because if you look after those three, then the management becomes a whole lot easier, right?
Yeah.
So I just
so
think
true.
it really does.
The bit I used to get pissed off the most with is we used to find good tenants. I just say to the next, it's not just about letting it, it's about finding the right tenant for that property.
Yeah, exactly.
If they're an arsehole, we're not putting them in there.
Yeah, and they're going to be difficult to deal with.
And the same with the landlords. Yeah. The bit that I used to get really frustrated was the contractors.
Yeah.
I was like, why have you not uploaded the invoice?
Yeah.
Like they're wanting fucking payment for that.
Yeah, exactly. And why shouldn't they have payment?
And they would get annoyed.
Yeah.
And it would cause conflict and friction.
Yeah.
And then they're like,
You know,
Yeah.
ours are brilliant. We're really lucky, but you know, again, that all comes down to our, you know, the relationship building. We have really open, honest conversations with our contractors. If we have someone, you know, someone that's not happy about something, then we will have an honest conversation with them. You know, you know, there's none of this. Oh, we're not going to work with them. That kind of stuff doesn't happen.
Mm.
I mean, as a result, kind of going off track slightly, our arrears, I can count on one hand,
Amazing.
which is unheard of,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, in this industry. So, but we've always run that really tight. But I think,
But so how do you, without giving your secrets away, because that's like 350 property of one person, like when you say the processes have been tight,
yeah,
like like most agents I speak to say they've got like a system on their property management side that just basically has a arrears section that says these are the outstanding
yeah,
properties that need chasing,
yeah,
or you do the bank reconciliation
hmm
and there's these ones outstanding.
hmm
So like, how is your process tighter?
because I think what a lot of people do is people will hide behind the system, right? And they will email this, email that. We pick up the phone.
Yeah,
I actually, as we sat here thinking about it, I think that is a big thing. We have telephone calls with people, and that makes everything so much quicker. Because
100%.
you know, if you've got an arrears issue or whatever that might be, and you send an email, well, I'm not. I want an instant. I want to know now anyway. But you know,
Yeah.
when someone says soon as possible for me is immediately now, whereas as soon as possible for someone else is next Tuesday.
Mm.
You know, so I think we're really good on the phone. We drum that into our guys, you know, and I think actually, as we're sat thinking about it, I think that is a big part of it. We're very, you know, reactive, but you know, but in the right way, you know, in as much as we'll just pick the phone up straight away. It won't
But
just
what's
be send
crazy
an
about
email.
that is you just think that that would be more time consuming
Yeah,
because it's easier to send an email, get on to the next thing.
yeah. But
Whereas a
is it
phone call
though?
might, yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
It's
It's
yeah. I don't think it is.
a phone call that might be 5, 10 minutes long. Might think that's a long period of
Yeah,
time, but that results a trail of 7 bouncing
yeah,
emails, tennis
yeah,
emails coming back to get to the same resolution.
yeah,
I 100% so relate to that because I used to say to them
yeah,
like, why to a property owner, why would you not pick up the phone?
yeah,
Why are you sending another email?
yeah,
Just get fucking resolution. But
yeah.
it's fear of. Do you think how you manage your teams supports them with being able to pick up the phone call to get the outcome?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, Connor and Luke manage their teams, and they both do that. You
Yeah.
know, so I think they're really good leaders of their own business. You know, because ultimately they run their own businesses. You know, as a branch, and I think they're both fantastic role models. You know, and it's not a case of you know, do as I say, don't do as I do. They lead by example, and they do all the things, and I think because they do that, they get resolutions really quickly.
Mm.
You know, so their guys can be, oh, actually, yeah, that you know that does work really quickly. You know, so I think. Um, you know, and I think one thing you have to think that I've been thinking about this a lot, you know, lately in terms of like training staff and all of that. You know, you tell them to do it, so that you expect it to be done that way, but that's not always the case. You have to keep reminding, you have to just keep showing. It's constant show and tell, and they're both really good at that, you know. And I think they're guys, and again, they can have very clear, direct conversations with their team members, and there's such respect. They both of them, you know, have so much respect. You know, we do Employee of the Month, Employee of the Year, and they both won Employee of the Year this, you know, this year for their branches. You know, because their guys respect them so much, and I think so they can garner that kind of respect. You know, get their guys to do what they want them to do.
So I'm conscious because I know we could probably talk for ages
Days,
because we do, right.
yeah,
So that you touched on that point, right? You've got a fabulous culture from how you operate. I can see it
Mm,
from an outset. How all three of you talk.
yeah,
The conversations I had with you as well. Like, give a sense of listeners out there. So, like, we were having this conversation for Christmas, right?
yeah,
And you said one of the team members has just joined us, and
yeah,
the another team member was saying Christmas at Harrison Wood is like you're gonna love this,
yeah,
and like most
yeah.
other industries, you think you're fucking working in a toy shop or something like that, not an estate agency
I
office,
know,
right? So like,
they love it.
has culture always been at the forefront of it, and these sort of things? So tell us like little things that you probably do. So employee of the month,
Yeah,
how does that work?
Employee of the Month. So we have end of month end of month meetings in each office, for sales and lettings, and everyone votes for their person. And the good thing is they vote face to face, so they can hear them say something nice about them. So they do.
Lovely.
They win Employee of the Month, and we've got like a wheel that they spin, and they can win Primark voucher, Nando's, or whatever. So that's really nice. So they do that every single month. We do Employee of the Year. And in lettings, because obviously Whittam is a smaller branch, etc. So they all vote for someone in Colchester, someone in Whittam. So they can all, give each other, some nice feedback. And I really love that, to be fair. So, yes, we do that. We do things like, on people's birthdays, we do, nice birthday presents. There's always cakes involved for us. It's always the Colin the Caterpillar cake is our thing.
For Christmas time, right? Go for for what you said, like it was a fucking Sunday.
Yeah.
You were going around getting these crackers that you decided to do, right?
So that was another thing. Yeah.
So like stuff like that, because I'm a massive advocate for this.
Yeah.
That if you get the teams, really, you see them for the humans that work within the brand. Than just an employee or a member of the staff.
Yeah.
Your staff, or that's an employee of mine.
Yeah, they're just my people.
Yeah, your people.
Yeah.
What did you do? Just run through that story.
So I started this quite a few years ago now. So the 1st of December is essentially Harrison Wood Lettings birthday, I guess. And we love Christmas Harrison Wood. So the 1st of December is the start of Harrison Wood Christmas. So that means that, any time from that onwards, people can wear Christmas jumpers every day. And some people do wear them every single day. And a few years ago, I thought, I'll get presents for people, so it started off quite small, they get an advent calendar. It's always advent calendars, and people get Easter eggs as well. But a few years ago, I thought, I know, I'm going to get everyone personalised stockings. So I got them made, and I started doing this in about September. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get personalised stockings made, and then I'm going to fill them up with bits. So I was ordering advent calendars, chocolates, had Harrison Wood baubles made. This year we got all the stockings, so that they had what was in there? There was, obviously a chocolate orange, scratch cards, all of these things, little silly toys, all of those things. We make sure that the Harrison Wood, windows are done, because we have like window decorations by the 1st of December.
Yeah.
And it just so happened that the 1st of December was a Monday. I was at the training with you guys, so I wasn't going to be in that day. So the day before, on the Sunday, I got up and I hand delivered every stocking to everyone. So it's on their desk when they got in the morning with their advent calendar and all the little treats. I also bought little treats for the office. It was, I don't know, some chocolates, mince pies, some kind of like tree chocolates, all that kind of stuff. So that was in the office as well. And I hand delivered them to every person's desk ready. So when they got in on the Monday, that was there ready for them.
And where does that come from though?
I don't know. I think I just love doing it.
Because you think kindness is a main thing that you really install within the company.
Yeah.
But kindness with accountability.
Yeah.
And then this nurturing element to it.
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from. I think, I think I've always been quite a nurturing person. I was an aunt when I was 10, so I've always had young people in my life. I don't have children of my own, but I've got a lot of nieces and nephews who I, adore. And I think I've just naturally been that kind of person.
Yeah.
But I've always thought years ago, I had this thought in my mind, because someone young who worked in sales didn't work for me, but was treated really badly by their manager. And it just really triggered something in me. And my view is, if I employ someone, I have a duty to make sure that they feel safe, protected, and looked after in the workplace. And as you start to care about these people, that extends outside of that. And that doesn't mean that I'm soft on people. That doesn't mean that they get telling off that if they misbehave. But it does mean that doesn't mean that I don't love them. Tough love is still love, and it doesn't mean that if I have to tell them off that I stop caring about them. It's because I care about them that I do it. So I just think, for me, I've got all these people that work for me, and for our sales team, and I want to make sure that they feel happy and safe and they enjoy work. And a few years ago, when I first did it, one of the lads said, I've never had a stocking before. And I just thought, wow, we've done that, and I just, It's a ball ache. I'm not gonna lie. You know, and it was. I was just in the process of hoping to move myself, been on holiday, etc. And I just thought I could do without this, but I know how much they love it. And to me, that is worth every bit of hard work because, hearing, like Meg said to Rachel a few months ago, she was one who said, "Oh, I can't wait, can't wait till you experience Christmas Harrison Wood." And the fact that she'd said that, I was like, oh, that's why I do it. That's exactly why I do it, because they look forward to that. They get excited about that. And if I can make them happy in that moment, then it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want to make someone else happy? I just don't understand that. So, it's always been my thing. And I think, as I say, Easter eggs. I mean, when I bought it was funny this year, when I bought all of the advent calendars, there was about 50 advent calendars, and I walked out of Sainsbury's and a little girl went, wow. With my joy piled up with advent calendars, but it's the same for
Easter. Real life
Easter.
Mrs. Claus.
I am. I need to get a little outfit. But yeah, I just love it. I really do. And when those messages come through in the morning, I mean, it's a shame I wasn't there this year, but I just get a lot of joy from that. And like things like the Christmas crackers. I honestly, I was so annoyed with myself because just before Christmas, and I was like, we had a target. We wanted to hit £1 million income. It's like, right, I need everyone, to be in. We've got to let these properties. So I just thought, let's make it a bit fun. Let's do something. And Connor said, oh, why don't we, like have Christmas crackers? And I was like, brilliant. I'd buy some Christmas crackers, put some vouchers inside. Well, I couldn't find anything, could I? So I was like, okay, well, I'll make some Christmas crackers, right? So I ordered these Christmas cracker packs and they arrived and they're flat pack. They were literally flat pack Christmas crackers. And I am not someone who's crafty. I'm not creative. And I literally sat there 3 nights in a row making 36 flat pack Christmas crackers. But they loved them, like everyone, could win them, whether it was an apprentice or property manager, they could all win them. They just loved it. And that's why I do it, because we expect a lot from people, right? I want them to work hard, but I also want them to have fun with it, and I tend to do treats more if they haven't had a good week, I don't always do rewards just because they've done well. I'll sometimes do it if they've had a tough week.
I think that's like a good way to work on it, because it's no different than having like, I see some agents and they say they only have one-to-ones when the shit hits the fan.
Oh no,
then it puts pressure on the individual because they're like, oh fucking, I'm being managed again.
Yeah.
And like no different than the treats. Like,
yeah.
I always say to people, don't come to me when we're doing coaching when you've completed it, but not come to me when you've not done it.
Yeah.
Because the coaching is the most powerful coaching is when you haven't done it, and then we work
That's
through
when you need the help, right?
rather than just going ticked off.
Yeah.
So to be able to have an environment where even in the most shittiest periods of time, you've got the leaders behind you, backing you and saying, right, let's go.
Yeah.
Here's some stuff, or just get a little bit of excitement going.
Yeah. If there's a call out, we're going to, go buy pick a mix, or I'm such a feeder, I'm always, lunch, coffees or whatever, all those kind of things. Because for me, that's my love language, right? Actually, caring for people is my, my way of saying, I got you, whether I'm sending someone a book or whatever, that is my way of saying, I see you, okay, I'm here, and I've just always been that way. And I think, when you've got young people, they need that, right? At home as well as at work. So yeah, I like to be that safe space, I think.
So I could continue to talk, but I know we have a limit.
Carry on.
I get told off, right? So if anyone's listening now, they're going, do you know, I'd love to pick your brains a little bit more.
Yeah.
Where's best for them to contact you? Where do you usually hang out?
My email.
Yep.
So Tracey, Tracey, don't forget the E, at harrisonwood.co.uk, or I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find me on there.
And the spelling of the surname?
There's no surname on my email, so it's just Tracey at...
Sorry, what I mean is on LinkedIn.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, that would help. Dumont.
Perfect.
That's an unusual one.
Okay. Right, appreciate you coming on. Thank you very
much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this Estate Agency X podcast. Can you make sure that you're actually subscribed to this podcast channel if you liked the content? It helps us massively to get better guests, and it just helps us generally. So you might think you're subscribed, but just have a double check, whatever your podcast platform of preference is, that you're actually subscribed. And then that way we can continue to grow the channel and get better and better guests for you.